Welcome to episode 774 of Salsido Paranormal. I'm your host, James Salsido, here tonight with my co host, Jen, the Arcane Observer, and tonight we'll be talking about shadow figures of all kinds. As always, you can find all the episodes of the show, along with links to social media and ways to listen and ways to support the show at the website, which is salsidoparanormal.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.com. Support is never expected but always appreciated, as there are expenses in making these shows, from equipment to research materials to travel expenses in some cases. Please check out all the links in every episode description for all the friends of the show that help out in all the ways they do. Of course, the link for Jen's channel, and then also the links to the Michael Strange's Trouble Minds Radio show and network, Trouble Minds Radio, KUAP, Digital Broadcasting, where you can hear this show and not maybe this episode because this is a longer form episode, but other episodes of this show and other people's shows as well from the network. So that network is up and running 24/7 and with all kinds of interesting material there for you all to listen to. So this is something that came from this idea for this show came from a couple things. First of all, me realizing that I never did a show on this topic before that I can think of, and also having an experience recently with a shadow figure. Just the top part of one. I described it in a show previously, but I'll just go over it real quick. I was getting up from my computer here where I sit down, and I'm here a lot when I'm awake. And I happened to just stand up and look toward my this one space between a closet and my kitchen doorway, and there was just the shoulders and head of a shadow figure. And it was not against the wall. It was in the middle of the space between the wall and the doorway. And it was just there, and then it was gone. I didn't get any feelings from it, but it was pretty amazing because if it was against the wall, then maybe I could have written it off. But it was not against the wall. It was out in the middle of the empty space there. So, and then there was some light coming in from outside, just a little bit. The sun was going down, but like I said, it was not against the wall, so I don't think it could have been a shadow of anything. So it was really amazing. I just realized that I'd never done a show on this, and excuse me. So that's kind of where this show came from, is having another weird experience. So, but yeah. So with that, I think we're all set to go here, and let's welcome Jen onto the show. Thank you for being here, as always, Jen.
Yeah, it's good to be here. It's a neat
So
experience you had. I'd like
yeah,
to.
I was gonna ask you
Is
about
that
that.
the
What you
only
thought
time
about?
you've seen something like that before?
Yeah, it's I did have a couple of previous shadow figure or shadow, more like a shadow blob kind of sightings years ago. But this didn't look like that. That was very much just a shadow oval the size of a person. And with that, I felt like that was this figure that used to basically just stay overnight in my storage room closet. That and it would just be there at night, but then it wouldn't be there in the day. And I never got any bad feelings from it, but I sensed it in that room for years, and then finally it came out a couple of nights in a row as I was listening to different shows and things, and it just stood or hovered or whatever it did by the kitchen doorway, and then it went back into the room, and then after those 2 nights where I saw it just briefly, I never sensed it in that closet again. So I feel like it was saying goodbye in a way. Like, thanks for letting me use your space, and I'm moving on. So I don't know if this was the same figure from those two experiences to this one. I haven't felt that presence in that closet, so I lean toward it not being the same figure. But of course, it's impossible to know.
I went through a little period of time. It was quite a while back now, where I was seeing those. What's weird though is, well, I only saw like a couple, but it was particularly there was this one apartment I was staying in, and a lot of stuff had happened in the apartment. Like it was really neat. It had once been used, I think, as a law office or something like that. And so it was all really neat and old. I think it was probably from the 30s or something. And it was part of a fourplex. Like there was my apartment, and above that there was another apartment. And then on the other side of the hall, there was like another two apartments in the same way. And the top ones, they had like a balcony, and the downstairs they had like a nice porch. It was a really nice apartment. So I really liked it. But it just had this really kind of neat antique sort of feel. The apartment itself it had radiator heaters, the kind that have, I think it's water, I think it's water, like steam heat running through. And just everything about it. It had like an antique bathtub in it, and it was just really cool. But there itself, I didn't like sleeping in the bedroom. I actually would sleep like in the living room essentially. And there was one night, and I remember this was really weird, but it got broken into. So somebody came through the window of the apartment and like just stole like some of the like the television stuff, and there was I had like a DVD player thing, and basically this was some time ago, but several things. I had some swords on the wall, and those things were stolen.
Wow.
And like a statue I had was broken that was on the table. Anyway, somebody broke into the apartment. When I came in and discovered it had been broken into and was walking through it, I turned the corner into what was like it was in between the living room and the bathroom. It was like, I guess it might have been an office or like it wasn't a bedroom. It wasn't really a dining room. It had like a pocket doors. Huh. But when I came through the hallway and turned into that room, there was this. It's like I almost walked into a person. There was this big shadow figure there. I don't know if it's because I was so, but I stopped actually, like you would if you were to turn a corner and almost run into somebody.
Yeah.
And it was like that. But what's really odd, I mean, it could have been just because I was sort of anticipating possibly running into someone, or I was kind of scared, but it was there and then gone again. So you can't tell if it was like, I wondered ever since then, was it my mind playing tricks on me, or was there something actually standing there? But I was pretty convinced at the time. And it was just there and then gone. And it didn't have it looked like it didn't have like a neck. It was like literally like a head on top of shoulders, like broad shoulders, and and that's what it looked like. But the lights were all on. I had turned all the lights on and everything. So it was like in a bright room, and it was clearly there though. But I saw that. And then trying to think of it seems to, and then of course like when I was really little, I remember seeing, I think it was a shadow figure like outside my window. But a lot of children report stuff like that. And then I remember too, when the whole shadow people conversation was going on, it kind of started, I remember Art Bell kind of broke the news on that. Pardon me. And like a lot of people were talking about it sort of. And then suddenly, it was like this explosion of people seeing it. And attached to that, kind of followed with the Hat Man, where people were seeing that sort of thing. So just something neat too, that I'm sure people have always seen, specters, I would say. Maybe like that.
Yeah. Yep. I think the shadow figure thing has probably been around for just possibly all time. It's just that now there's faster ways. It's a lot easier to get the word out about people's sightings to all kinds of places really, really quickly.
That's it. I think that's probably what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But you are right though. They're not all the same figure. They have different features. Some shadow figures. I mean, they I've talked about this before. I've read a few accounts of people's experiences where they the shadow figure sort of, it wasn't even a figure necessarily. It was more like a almost like the opposite of an orb, like a sphere, a circle
Like
that
a
would be,
void or something?
yeah, and it'd be moving around, or sometimes it'd even be three-dimensional, and it'd be moving around the space and it'd have like sort of like spikes coming rising and falling on it, so that they're
Yeah.
just like these spiked sphere things that a few people have seen over the years. But then the rest seem to be humanoid. But even those, I've heard different versions of that, where some do appear to have hats, some appear to have more like a cloak, almost like we talked about a while ago, the whole thing with cloaked figures. Although at that time
Mhm.
we covered the whole skeleton um, uh, Grim Reaper kind of thing. But I've also heard of just shadow figures that appear to be just a cloaked figure, but then you can't see any details in their where their face would be. And then, of course, all the different hat figures, different kinds of hats, and then some that just don't have any. I have heard too accounts of similar almost to yours, where people come home or they're even home and they hear something like someone actually trying to break in, and then they see a shadow figure, and then no one breaks in, and the idea is that this whatever this shadow figure is that was there at the time actually may have frightened away any kind of person that was trying to break in, for
Yeah.
whatever reason. Who knows why they do that, if it's intentional or not. But I've heard of accounts of that where people um, hear things in their home, and then they hear the initial sounds of like a break in, but then in some cases even there's even I've heard where like nothing is stolen because they just hear someone leaving really fast because they were freaked out by whatever they saw.
Yeah.
So
I've heard of, I mean, I have heard a lot of different types of accounts of them. Just, I think too, what's really interesting is there's the idea of the type of energy that they give off being different for everybody too. A lot of people, of course, they're stricken with, what would you call it? I mean, just fear,
yeah,
essentially, anxiety. To wake up and see that is very common for people who have seen the shadow figures. They'll see them with the in between of sleep, or they've just laid down, or they wake up to it and they see it in their room. And of course, they report almost like as if the shadow figure is like feeding, or they feel as if it's emanating from. I kind of think like that in some cases, with some of these, not all of them, but that some of them, I think that maybe they're emanating a type of frequency, and it sort of reaches out, in a way with some kind of radio field or something. And it causes the people in the environment to feel it too. Like sort of a fear, sort of, because fear is so easily accessible of an emotion, and it creates so much energy, pretty quickly. And it can be escalated. And I think that, the once the person begins to feel fear, it begins to sort of escalate and intensify, especially if they see something that apparently shouldn't be there, or they're not expecting to be there. And so I think there's some sort of parasitical, almost, or they're just emanating that type of energy or something, or that you could have even a void effect where you just kind of feel like the presence of it feels almost like a void or something, like a vacuum.
yeah, especially those cases where the figure is darker than the darkness around it. That seems like that would
Hmm.
make sense. And yeah, they do seem to give off different. People seem to feel different about different ones.
Hmm.
Some are definitely afraid. I don't know. I do think that there's probably some cases where the person is afraid just because they're seeing something that they can't explain. But then
Oh, of
I
course.
think that there's probably other cases where the fear is the point. The more negative cases, the whatever the shadow figure there is, it is feeding on the energy from that fear. I don't think it's all cases, of course, but I definitely think some. Just like everything else we talk about on these shows, I think there's always a range of things, not
Mhm.
just sort of what we hear about in Hollywood, as I always point back to. But and then there's just it's amazing because there's some where they don't even almost they seem to be unaware of the people that see them, like they don't even know that they're there. They're just kind of there for whatever they're there for. Even in some cases, I've heard of some like fleeing when they feel like they've been noticed or when they notice someone, they'll just leave, and it's almost like they're afraid instead, like the opposite of what you would think. And so there's just a wide range of reactions by the people and also reactions by the shadow figures to whatever happens. So, and I think it's amazing because I've noticed that there's a similarity between these shadow figures and the idea of like orbs or lights, to where there are so many people have so many thoughts on what they are uh, for both of those things, whether it's aliens or spirits or they're their own completely different thing, or
Mhm.
all of the above. There's all different kinds. I tend to fall into that category of what I think everything what's going on. But or in some cases it is more like a void where it's we just have no idea what it is. I did find a few articles, and I'll put them in the episode description, but I didn't include them in the chat tonight because there's just they talk about what we're talking about here, just all the different things. But one detail that they mentioned in one of them was that it could be some shadow figures are less defined because they are less defined to themselves. They don't have a lot of they're not sure who or what they are. So they don't have a lot of features because they don't they don't know for whatever reason a lot about themselves. And I wonder if that's
That's
something that
interesting.
happens when like when someone passes, if some shadow figures are spirits that just haven't kind of remembered or realized everything yet, and
I don't
so they're
know.
just
It's
yeah
yeah. I mean, it could be that the entity itself it's unique to itself and it is self-sovereign, some type of species. But I mean, there's
right
also if it if you think about the idea that if they're connected to people in some type of energetic level or some sort of, the I guess some kind of spectrum of light, that's having an effect of some kind with light or lack of it, maybe it is actually even that type of invisible light radiation of some kind that people are perceiving, but just to think about the way that I mean they're witnessed. So like when a person sees them, it's their interpretation of how their eyes and their mind are interpreting it. In addition to that, like the way that their other all of their senses are interpreting the presence of whatever these are. So it's working at some kind of entirely different level. I'm trying to think of how I want to like the fact that they are interacting with the senses and being witnessed by people or animals, and the way that they are being picked up by the senses is as this a type of void energy, or they are emitting a frequency, a fear frequency, which is really interesting. That just that they could kind of turn up. If you've heard about, we've heard about a lot of the technology they have, where they can just sort of turn a dial and sort of make people sort of experience certain emotions of excitement or tension. There's certain music beats that do the same thing or more relaxed. So I wonder if they
right
have some kind of like their type of tech, not a technology, but that they are the natural form of the technology that our technology is imitating or something, but that they have this sort of the way that they are interpreted might have a lot to do with the individual experiencing the shadow entity. I mean, that's what I think that's what I was trying to get to. That
yeah
there's some kind of relationship between the witness with the way that they encounter the shadow entity. The accounts of multiple people seeing a shadow entity are sort of rare. Like, I've seen ball lightning, and I saw that literally with a group of other people who were also very shocked at seeing it. And it happened in the same apartment that I saw this shadow figure in that I was talking about earlier. But I was alone when I saw that shadow figure. So then I did doubt. I knew that I thought I had seen it, but of course you think that, of course, it's just an anticipation. When I saw that someone had come into my apartment, that my apartment had been broken into, that things had been taken, and they left out the front door, so stuff was actually strewn out. They left really quick, so there was actually stuff strewn out and this was in a city, so it wasn't like I was really surprised and shocked, but at the same time, I think when I was going into the apartment, I was expecting to run into someone. Like, I knew I shouldn't, like, but I went ahead and went in because I didn't know why the door was open, stuff was outside. And it didn't really occur to me immediately that someone's broken into my apartment. I was really young, and it was one of my first apartments ever. And I just kind of, naive. But I expected to see someone. And when I turned that corner, I saw that I almost walked in to that shadow figure. So there was a sort of anticipation and a lot of really hyped up nervousness, that I was
Yeah.
experiencing when I saw it. Now, too, if you think about when you're going to bed, that's what's odd, too, is sometimes people see these things and there's nothing, pardon me, nothing that really instigated. They'll say that nothing really instigated that they would see it. They weren't expecting to see anything. They just woke up, or they noticed slowly while they were trying to go to sleep that there was something in there with them. So it's just bizarre. Now, is it all like you were saying, the lights being seen too? Exactly. Like I say, it's weird that there was that ball of lightning. Now, was that some type of, we were doing a lot of kind of following the spiritists movement, seances and the whole thing of trying to, communicate with the deceased. And so was there some type of connection with that? Was that involved with it as an extension of it? Because all of that stuff, of course, went through my mind. That I thought that it was connected when I saw it because of the apartment had already begun to take on a sort of energy because I lived there. So we would do these things there, but I also lived there. So the apartment already had begun to feel to me spooky. And not to mention that
Right.
it had the atmosphere and that it was an old building. But some people, I mean, they're absolutely convinced, and it'd be really easy for me to say that I was pretty convinced, but then you have to come back to some sort of like, you know, solid state of like if that's true, if that was something, and other people report seeing these things too. The phenomenon itself seems to be linked, at some kind of not undiscovered, but unacceptable cyclical level is the interaction with with this phenomenon,
Yeah. I do wonder too, maybe, I mean, we'll probably never know, but did was their stuff kind of like when the person left after they had, broken in, did they, did they leave in a hurry because they saw something? Did they see the figure
I
before
don't
you did?
know.
And it scared them
I
out
don't
of
know.
there and maybe stopped them from getting more?
People would
It's hard.
experience auditorial hallucinations
Right.
during these seances. And like I myself, but what was weird about it was on a couple of occasions, it wasn't just one person hearing it. It like one occasion was we were there and the just hearing somebody's name said, and it just happened so quickly and like almost like it's underwater or something, but heard it in the air around the table,
Yeah.
heard it there. And then not just one person but the people all there, like, "Whoa, did you hear that?" That sort of group phenomenon. So I don't know, I think that until we are living in a society or a culture that doesn't just look at this as a form of entertainment, but as some sort of reasonable experience, which could amplify the experience, and distract from the current culture we live in if it was to be recognized at that level, I think. So there might be a sort of conspiracy about even being allowed to talk about and to realize and to accept that if you have had an experience of this kind because it's so untolerated. And typically, it's not just fluffed off, but it's immediately met with a great deal of skepticism. Even though the people that tell these stories, the people around them, know them to readily be just a typical functioning uh, citizen, so, person in society. But it's still, we just have a culture that, beyond entertainment, doesn't seem to be very accepting of the possibility of this experience. And then though there's an interest in finding out what it is, I mean, it has to still be met with a person who can talk about it would have to have some kind of credentials and things like that for people to really give it a lot of credit, even though it's experienced by people at all levels in all walks of life. And I don't know. I think we just have a very closed off society when it comes to these things, and that's in the way of understanding it. I think people understand perfectly well what they experience and what they see. It's just not met with a lot of tolerance, in the
Yeah.
bigger spectrum.
That's funny that this come up. This came up because a few nights ago, one of Michael Strange's shows earlier this week uh, made me think about that. Why do people react in the different ways that they do when they have encounters with anything that they can't explain? And there do seem to be different reactions for different people, and I was thinking we
I
should
think there's a
do a
lot of
show on that.
fear. I
Yeah,
mean, there's fear of being stigmatized by that, and even possibly, losing any type of what would you call it, like a social credit level, or
yep,
mentally, is this person touched in some way? So
yeah.
there's immediate stigmatism, is
There is.
why I would
I think,
say in general, because for safety reasons, because the general, it's um, in the mental health spectrum. This it's one of those things
yeah.
that should reason, and that should tell people a lot. Even though culturally, there has been acceptance to seeing the dead, to seeing the deceased. It undeniable sort of, what would you call it? Evidence.
Yeah.
Undeniable evidence. If it's not enough for one person and you have multiple people, you can pretty much, no, not replicate it as in like a lab, but I think with the right scenario, it is witnessed
Oh,
by
yeah.
other individuals. So that's a group. When you'd have to say it's a group, and they have a name for that too. They'll call it what is that? A group
Mass.
psychosis, essentially,
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like
Mass hallucinations, that kind of thing. Yeah.
that. Yep.
I think that'd be a good show to do it maybe next time, is just the how people react and why they react the way they do, and I think that could be a good discussion for next time. But
Yeah.
the other thing that ties into that is I've heard there are some people that write off shadow figures in general because people see them when they have sleep paralysis sometimes.
I know, and
And
sleep paralysis. That's kind of irritating too, because I mean the experience. I mean, people like when it's been just kind of put into that file of its sleep paralysis, and
yeah,
it's attached to it is all of this very bizarre sort of um it's a whole file to itself. But
yep,
people are like, well, it's sleep paralysis, and so that's how it's situated. It's night terrors, even though there's apparent some sort of, I guess, supernatural in the truest sense of just something very incredible that seems to be, it's not a phenomenon. It's like not much different than, like, it'd be like calling drowning, like the type of experience you might have, or jumping out of a plane, like the sort of sensory explosion of things that are happening, because the tension of not being able to not being able to move and being in that, and then oftentimes seeing, very clearly some type of entities, or even having even further than that, where there's a type of communication going on. These are all things that are experienced in sleep paralysis, but just the fact that it's filed away as something that is purely in the mind, which also too, I don't know. I don't know that that's necessarily a problem, but it becomes a problem in an institutionalized environment. So once again, and especially in the West, where it's stigmatized, though it's okay to present as entertainment.
Yeah.
And people are perfectly fine with reading books about it and watching shows about it, and even going out of their way to kind of dabble in the occult and have experiences themselves. And then when they do, the experiences they have can't be validated because it's not socially acceptable to even validate the experience. So then you kind of come to a, sort of a wall in doing any
Yeah.
further research with it. Because when you actually do start to have experiences, they're immediately kind of washed with, well, that's just some type of mass hallucination or some sort of overactive imagination. So that's really, strange too, I think.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. I've heard of that with people say, well, if it happened while you were, in any kind of different state from near sleep before or after, then it was all just in your mind.
Dream. Yeah, a
And
dream or something.
yeah, and to me, I've had so many experiences while I'm sleeping that I I I can't just write that off as just being regular dreams. There's way too many. And
Well,
so
too,
if
and
I have those,
dreams themselves, I mean, being kind
yeah.
of pushed aside is another problem. I mean, dream
Oh
state
yeah.
is so significant in a lot of cultures, but in our culture, once again, the instance we're talking about, sleep paralysis, and they'll say, "Oh, you were dreaming," which is supposed to just kind of, or like when children have experiences, or when anybody
Yeah.
has an experience, and it's if they were in an almost semi-sleep state or a waking state, well, it was part of a dream, and it's immediately discounted as an actual experience. So it's almost like this deficit of any type of substance. Yeah, oh, it's your imagination. It almost completely sucks the meaning and significance of what it might mean out of it. But our culture is so depraved, or I'm sorry, so deprived of any of this sort of thing, because it doesn't fit into what they need everyone to actually be focused on, which is just productivity and
Yeah.
consumption, consuming. And if it's not just for entertainment, if it goes beyond entertainment and goes into a level of there's something more significant going on here, then I think it's attempted to kind of dissuade it, But there's also probably some dangers when dealing with the occult. I mean, people have lost their minds like getting too far into this. It's uncommon, but I've heard accounts of people. Aleister Crowley is a pretty good
Right.
example. A lot of people who have gone into the occult have kind of fallen into a sort of abyss. Oftentimes, the use of substances just to kind of get into an altered state of mind can become a problem. I've noticed you hear about that a lot, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yep. Yeah, and I mean just the I don't know, it's the writing it off as being in our minds or just all these things. I do think the mind is part of it, but again, it's just and then the fiction thing, that's just it's paranormal stuff in fiction is just everywhere.
yeah,
And but then it's not the other thing I wanted to say too is I do agree, going too far in anything it can be bad. Extremes are not never good. That's why people always ask me, "Well, have you ever thought about um like sort of expanding your sensitivities and trying to do have experiences all the time and be just constantly
right.
dealing with these things?" And I always say, I no, I've thought about, but no, I'm not going to do that because
Well, it's like when it really gets, pardon me, too like really far
yeah,
to where you're truly, at least you believe, but it's also witnessed by others, which even more reinforces what you believe. So, because that's something too. When you have this was something that I noticed. when doing the with a group, it's one that's validated. Like when somebody hears something and you're like, "Did you hear that?" And they're like, "Yeah." And it's like, "What did you think it said?" And they said something that's the same thing that you heard. In a scenario like where you're doing like say a seance or something of the effect, or in the case of Ouija board where there's actually paranormal phenomenon that's experienced, sort of a poltergeist effect, and it's experienced by many, like or just the even the group that you're involved with. Let's stick with that. The validation of that experience causes it to seem as if there becomes more experiences, or it becomes a lot more involved and more real. And then I think that that's just something that when it gets to that kind of point, it's not supposed to be in reality. At least that's the world we live in convinces us that that's not what's supposed to be in our reality. So if it is, there's no caveat of where to put it. It's a spiritual experience of sorts, but that's considered hyper religious, and it's a
Yeah.
type of even that being. I mean, even if you were to have it, say you put it in a whole different level, and say that somebody's having some sort of experience of an angel or a saint or something that's hyper religious, it's a little too far. They believe it too much. And so even that is stigmatized. So what do you do with it then? When people do have these experiences, initially it's really cool, but when you're actually faced with the officialness of, you know, real skeptics that believe just as fervently and just as strongly that it does not exist and you must be crazy, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that changes the whole dynamic and the person will shut it down typically.
Even even with organized religions, if you say you have an experience and you describe it one way and it doesn't fall into what any organized group thinks
Yeah,
is the way things are, they'll say, "Oh well, you're wrong," and you're either crazy or there's
right.
some being. It's the devil that's confusing you. It's demons they're confusing you. It's just yeah
Well, then there's another
the
group of people who say, if you say it's demons confusing you, they'll say that that person saying that is crazy as well. So I mean, there's a
right.
whole another when you get to the topest of any town officials, whether it's law enforcement or the medical field, or you start to get to the very official level where there's a lot of the control sector. Sorry, my dogs are freaking out. So
That's okay. I was just gonna say too that the 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 problem that I see so much now is everyone is sure of things and they don't they don't want to hear anything else that goes against what they are sure of.
yeah,
And it's I understand if it sort of if it's comforting or whatever, and if you want to think like that, anyone that's up to you and that's fine. But
right.
I don't think it's right for any organization to push their own narrative on everyone and expect them to all think that same way and they just accept everything just because that's what this one group
Yeah,
says.
I think there definitely should be a. I mean, I'm not a you know psychiatrist or anything like that, but I do think that they should have a that in our society it's really weird that, like I say, it's presented as a type of entertainment, and that's fine. If it goes too far and it gets too serious, then that's an issue. But I think that there's a big difference between a person thinking that they are, um, say, for example, that they live in your house actually, and you don't, and they break into your house and they do
Yeah,
something, or they're doing truly crazy things. Isn't there like a huge difference besides people having this sort of, cyclical experience or something? And I think that, that's pretty clear to see.
right.
But nevertheless, that doesn't mean that people who think that they live in your house don't also experience cyclical experiences and see weird entities or something. So, I mean, whatever these entities are, or whatever this is, the phenomenon of it, and it's not super common, it's not like it's the same as, you know, I don't know. I think that we just have to kind of make more allowance in our culture to not just from an entertainment perspective, but to consider it very seriously. Instead of with the natural inclination to be skeptical, is that's supposed to mean that you have a solid, that you're intelligent.
Right.
Skepticism being linked with credibility and being more intelligent, less flighty, so on and so forth, than someone who does have an experience or is willing to accept that this is probably, there's an immediate, though there's no, you could take somebody who is a professional, say in any field, a lot of law enforcement have encountered these entities.
Oh
And
yes.
so there is some credibility there. But do you see how I'm saying that
Yeah.
it's immediately disqualified and there's a stigma to it? And
Oh, and
so
they get
there's
ruined.
a
Their careers
struggle
get,
with credibility.
yeah,
Yes.
and their careers get ruined so
Hmm.
often. So they're ridiculed and just yeah. If anyone wants to look into, just pick your favorite paranormal podcast or shows or whatever, and look up, if you haven't already look up like police as a keyword or whatever. You can find some episodes and some accounts of experiences that are just, there's a lot there. Um, but
There are
getting back
accounts
to
of
the,
cryptids from, park
yeah,
rangers as well. So, I mean, there's
oh
a lot
yeah,
of stuff like that.
getting back to the shadow figure too. I've noticed I haven't heard a ton of accounts where there is a voice with it, where it seems to talk. Um,
Right? It's more like a
only a few
telepathic
here and there.
experience.
Yeah, even then, it's not. It doesn't always, even if there is some kind of telepathic thing or connection, it doesn't seem like words are exchanged all the time. Uh, and sometimes it's more like emotions. It's people get a sense of this figure is there to protect them. It's But when it comes to actual words that are heard through either through the ears or through the mind, that seems to be less common than
Hmm.
with, let's say, other situations like regular ghosts or whatever you want to have out
There's
there.
disembodied voices, even, yeah.
Yeah.
Aren't
Um,
disembodied voices aren't accompanied with shadow figures, sort of. Yeah.
right. Yeah, at least not usually, pretty rare. Except maybe in cases where there's just all kinds of things going on, because then that gets really complicated to know
Right.
what's happening with what. Yeah. First, yeah, Matt's all there in chat also says first responders have a lot of paranormal stories. Yes. Yep. Again, just look up
It's a
those terms. First responders, police, firefighters, just, I mean, of course, military, just all kinds of things. But sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, just I think that yeah, I mean the stigma to it is really significant. Um the fact that yeah, there aren't a lot of I've heard of people having, they hear disembodied voices but they don't see anything. But the other thing of it too though is that there's the physical touch though involved with shadow figures. A lot of people have reported that there's a mass to them, that there's some sort
Hmm.
of physicality to them. Like with my experience that I had, that I say it could have been spurred just by the shock that somebody had broken into my apartment. And so I anticipated to see, but there was a feeling like I was fixing to walk into it. And when I turned that corner, it was as if I was going to, when I saw it, I kind of stopped the same way you would, as if you were fixing to run into somebody when you turn a corner, say somewhere in a busy
Right.
office or something like that, or a busy building. It was that same type of like, whoa, sorry, I almost ran into you. It was sort of that kind of feeling. And that was it. It was literally seconds. But other people who have it when they have it in their bedrooms at night, there's accounts of them physically um, being handled, being
Yes.
touched, being handled by these shadow figures. And I like again, we can't really necessarily categorize them all into all shadow entities are going to have these, qualities to them. That's not the case at all. So it seems that that is pretty prevalent though, of people
Yeah.
feeling as if, uh, well, even struggling with being kind of handled. I guess I've heard of paranormal experiences where people say that. So
Yeah. And
that's really interesting.
there's also the way they move or they don't move. That's the whole thing as well. Sometimes they just appear and they're there and then they're gone. Like with my experience. But other times I've
Yeah.
heard of them sort of starting, like rising up on a wall or on a surface, and until they're like they're there, and then detaching from the wall. and moving
Mhm.
around wherever they're at, and then going back to the wall or just sinking into or dissolving into the floor. But then there's other ones where they're just there and then gone, or they're there in one spot in the room and then boom, they're in another spot and that kind of thing. So they don't all move the same way. And some don't even seem to move at all. In some cases, they're just there and then gone.
Mhm.
So I really do wonder if the different ways they move and their different features, if that is sort of, if those are hints that we have no way of knowing for sure, if those are sort of clues as to what each version is, if this one that moves one way is a alien, the other one that moves another way is a ghost, or that kind of a system.
Oh yeah.
I'm
There's
curious about that.
there's a podcaster there's a podcaster called Vic Cundiff, and he does
Okay.
dogman encounters. I used to listen to it, and it was really neat. When I lived out in the woods, I particularly liked listening to it, but I never saw one, so I sort of drifted away from it, but I was always still really fascinated. And then but they've people who have experienced dogmen, some people would say maybe werewolves, but the people who on that particular group of people studying that, they've divided it up into different categories. So they have like category 1, category 2, and 3, where they all kind of fit these particular, you know, face structure of the creature, or the ear shape, or the colors, or the eye color. So I think classifying, if you're going to look at shadow figures, I think that shadow entities haven't been beyond like Hatman really categorized very much. They haven't been broken up into, there's the wispy kind of wraith shadow figure.
Yeah.
People have recorded that. Huge. I've heard accounts of these being, some of them being really big. Um,
Yes.
Sort of taking up a hole, like is almost as tall as like a fence, or a lamppost or something,
Oh
and
yeah.
wispy, like a wraith or something. And then people have seen them sometimes in the light and not in a dark room. Like mine, I
Yes.
saw mine in a lit room. So that's odd, but that's not the only thing. I mean, people have seen that on CCTV footage. Now,
Yep.
whether that's the other problem we're running into too, is the age of AI. So we have this
Yes.
huge problem now where it makes me so irritated too, because now it's pretty much impossible. There's no way
Yep.
to know now. So it's ruined that study, that field of study, as far as like
Oh,
trusting any video at
I
all.
agree.
What a
Yeah.
shame.
That's why you know that's why I stick to the ways of finding stories I do, which is just like post online and then like listening to shows where people will come on and tell their experiences, because yeah, it's just any kind of video or audio evidence now
Yes.
is just so easily faked.
And what was already unbelievable has become now like even more supreme, like even more unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's ruined it in a way,
But
and especially
yeah,
too.
sorry, go
It
ahead.
does. No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I do wonder about because I have heard rare accounts of shadow figures sort of appearing uh out of nowhere as like a mist and then solidifying and then sort of fading out that way as well.
Hmm.
There's just so many accounts of the different ways they come and go. And sometimes it's really weird because sometimes they are just one thing that's happening in a really uh active location where there's other things happening, other apparitions, other all kinds of sounds. And other times the person just says, "Look, I had this one encounter with one shadow figure, and
Hmm.
that was it. And then I never saw one again, and I never had any other experiences." So I don't know what that means. If they are connected to everything else or not, it's really hard to know. But I do like that classification thing, and I've heard accounts of people saying they've seen shadow figures like in nature, and it would
Yeah,
go behind an object, and then something like a Bigfoot or Sasquatch or like a Dogman would come out.
yeah.
Um,
Glimmerman has that effect
yeah,
too. People have reported Glimmerman effect, and then they see a cryptid of some
yeah.
kind.
There was also now I found one of my stories on one of my true story shows I did a little while back. It was an amazing one because it was this couple that the wife would go outside with the husband And when the husband would get picked up to go to work early in the morning, and they lived right by a church, and they noticed, the husband noticed the first time, that there were these 4 shadow looking dogs, just
Oh.
moving around in a circle in front of a church,
Mhm.
and they couldn't see any like features on them, but they were not on a wall. They were just 3-dimensional shadowy dog figures. And so this guy saw this one morning, and then next morning the wife came out with this husband, and they both saw them. And one of the dogs, the figures, moved away from the circle and went behind a tree, and a humanoid shadow figure stepped out from behind the tree and
Whoa.
turned and just glanced at the people. And they couldn't see any features, couldn't see any eyes or anything like that. And then it went back behind the tree, and the dog came out from behind the tree and went back to the circle of the other, like 3 other dog figures.
So it's able to
And
like change its
yeah,
shape. Yeah.
I've never heard of one quite like that before, which
It
is why I
makes
love doing these
sense.
shows. But yeah, I
It
just
makes
thought that was
sense that they would
amazing.
change their form. But there's the whole interdimensional visitor concept that
Yeah,
like the Hatman or some of these others that they came again last night. You hear these kind of stories where the person is a sort of a constant experiencer, sleep paralysis victims. It's very common. Where, I couldn't move and I saw them again. And that sort of thing. So, where it seems as if they're visiting from some sort of other dimension or something. And there's a sort of
right.
constant sort of way that it's going to go. And they know how it's going to go. And they experience that. So you have the interdimensional traveler sort of shadow being, but then you also have the sort of shadow being that's morphing, as you were just putting it in that case, its
Yeah,
shape. So kind of a fog that takes the shape of a person or a mist that appears like black ink. I've heard that be expression too. I've heard people say, you
yes.
ever seen like ink being poured into water or something? The way it looks like that. It was a way that it's been described too. So I don't
And I
know.
and I have heard, it's not as common, but I have heard accounts of people seeing shadow figures of animals here and there. Um,
Yeah.
like dogs and cats and things like that too, and other animals, and even just in a few rare cases, I've heard of people seeing like I said, like an oval shape of like this, an oval shadow the size of, let's say, a cat or something smaller, moving around their
Mhm.
home, like on the floor. So there's all kinds of. I mean, they're not just humanoid. That's the weird thing, and it's so I do wonder what all is out there as far as what all are all the different versions. And
Right.
but yeah, that account with the dog shadows, and then the one, because it just makes me wonder how many, I don't know, are those dogs, and are they connected in some way to the land that the church is on, or are they connected to that church?
Well, sometimes
Or
churches had graveyards in them. Like the churchyard was also a cemetery. I mean, there's
right,
accounts of that, but
yeah,
I don't know if that was the case. But
I don't
I don't know. A church
remember.
would be I think a church. I've heard of there's the whole desecrated church thing too. Like if
True, yeah,
I've heard of abandoned churches, and then of course people start to desecrate the church or something like that. This is old stuff, but like when people actually were, I don't know. But in instances like that, where people move into churches as houses, like the church will be abandoned, and, they pop up these churches, and then nobody was attending, so they sell off the real estate. It's a weird building, and then
right,
somebody buys it, starts living in it like a house. But then they
yes,
have these weird experiences, and I could really
yeah,
see that happening. That just makes a lot of sense. But
yeah. I think anytime you have any kind of organized religious place that is then turned into a home or a business, even, you
oh,
know,
especially since some of these churches, it's not even. I mean, it's some of. I mean, religions. It's a whole the churches and how many churches there are in a town, and the that's a topic to itself. Just about like
that is
how some churches are just. It's a social gathering. they're attaching a spiritual significance to it. And so, like, and then as a social networking environment, with this intention of like giving homage, to their interpretation of whatever version of the,
Yeah.
whether it's Islam or Judaism or the Abrahamic religions in general, or even like maybe in Hindu temples. I don't know, but I think that the intention of the people who are attending it, because they're essentially a coven. It's not just, I mean, like in the old churches, that was the idea that the church, you would all have the same sort of, so it was like a giant coven. So that's why there'd be a lot of power, I think. That's just how it seems to be. And then the bigger churches, like say the Catholic Church, that it's a sort of entity, it's a huge coven of, that kind of notion was the idea. But when you think about these churches that pop up, say, like if you were to go into like the deep south and they've popped up like 8 different Methodist church in the same side of town and they can't all survive.
Right.
And so some of them shut down. And then people move into it and start a lawnmower business or move into it to rent it as a home or whatever. And then they have these weird phenomenon. I think there's the energy behind. I mean, that particular real estate is sort of stigmatized, even though nobody died there.
Mm.
It's kind of weird.
That makes me think of there's this one. It used to be a church, and it's in like a couple of towns over from where I live. And it was a church. I don't know many years ago, but eventually it was sold, and it became a theater or like a entertainment venue kind of place. And they'd have plays there, but they'd also have concerts there. And I always, whenever the place was, because sometimes I get there for events that my family was having there. My dad and my uncle, their band played there a few times, so I get there relatively early when there was not a crowd, or I'd be there when like the crowd had already left. And that place, as it got toward evening, energy just started. I could feel energy just flowing back into the place. Like there are just people that I couldn't see that were just like coming back for the night. And I've always wondered how that works. That's probably a whole other show too. Is why do some places seem to be gathering spots for energy or consciousness at night? Are they using it as a place to stay for the night? Like a temporary home or like a rest stop or
Maybe they're leftover, from the
yeah,
energy,
I don't
like
know, but
leftover thought forms or something.
I've noticed that in a few places over the years, in my own place where I had that one figure that it would just use my closet, going back to that first shadow thing that I ever saw. It just
Oh,
used my closet, and I never felt anything bad from them at all.
well, you have
But
that
yeah,
too, like where there's, children in particular talking about how the dark under the bed, or the dark in the
yes,
closet, and typically it's just like, well, it's because it's dark,
right,
so you're just afraid of, but just the reports of that in particular closets being a huge thing. And
oh
I
yeah,
thought, that has something to do with the fact that when I was trying to rationalize what it really could be, I was thinking those are areas that don't see light even when the light is on. So it'd be
right,
a very convenient place in this hypothetical for them to go, even if the light if they were somehow related to the dark, in a constant shadow form. That just made a lot of sense, but there's no way to, like I don't know what to do with that, but it would make sense. Do you see what I mean?
oh definitely.
In a way.
Well,
In a way.
it's a small space too that has 3 walls usually surrounding it, and then if you have the door closed, it's a small contained space. And I do think
Undiscovered
dimensions
for the
of
most part.
yeah, I do think dimensions of sizes of places and like the shapes of places and all those things. I think there's
Mhm.
something to that as well, to the way energy moves or collects in places like that. I think that can be, yeah, out of sight, out of mind as well. They can just hang out there and not be bothered or not bother anyone.
Yep.
But they also seem to be sort of. I've heard so many accounts of closets being like portals, my closet in my room, the one that where that figure used to stay. there is
Yeah.
what I feel like the remains of a portal, like just the just leftover little bit of energy that's in that on that wall from a portal that I can always pick up. My eyes are always drawn toward that closet, that wall of that
Yeah.
closet, even when I'm outside. I'm waiting for a ride. My eyes are still like drawn to that wall, even outside. So there's something to portals are probably something we should cover at some point too.
Yeah. It's a door to nowhere in that case, for sure.
Yeah.
And beds have a whole thing about them too. Like in a
Mm.
lot of cultures, there's a lot of things about beds. There's a whole bunch of lore about which way the bed is facing, and are there beams overhead, and which wall is it facing a bathroom wall. Like a lot of traditions don't think that you should face the head of your bed to where the opposite, on the other side of the wall, for example, the bathroom toilet might be.
Mm.
Or, sleeping where people may be, like an like apartment over a garage. I've heard of that not being, shui or
Huh.
whatever. So a lot of stuff like that too. Or
Well, there's
sleeping with your head under a window. And a lot of people think
yeah.
that's what headboards are about. Kind of put an extra, So I don't know. There's a lot of culture though about just beds in general. It's really interesting.
Well, and that's amazing because there are so many reports of. I mean, there's stuff happening in and around beds and bedrooms. I mean, that's where so
Not having
much.
your feet facing the door because it's like a
Yeah.
dead man's pose. If you have, because they used to carry deceased people feet first out of a room, so like you shouldn't have a bed positioned where your feet are facing the door. So there's a lot of lore like that. If you have floorboards, like actual boards, the bed should be parallel with those boards, not horizontal across them.
Oh wow.
So just yeah, lots of things like that. It's
And
really neat.
that's not even counting mirrors, and you don't want to have a mirror
They
within
do
sight of
mention that
your.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
or having that certain pictures shouldn't be in a bedroom, or that
Right.
I know this is, but I think mirrors themselves, the superstition about covering mirrors. I mean, in general, I don't like. I would cover if I had a mirror in my room. I would cover it.
Yeah.
That's just because I have heard so many weird. Not because I'm necessarily, but there is so much lore. Not even just from stuff I've read, but even in my family that I've heard about like certain times and certain, this sort of thing that they have talked about, that their grandparents or something like that have talked about. And it's typically just spooky stories sort of around a table. But I'm sure,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
something interesting about it.
Matt's house says, "Don't let your feet hang over the bed, or the boogeyman will get them." Yeah,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
heard people say that seriously, kind of thing, where
The more
people
you
have
think
had
about it, the
experiences.
more, yeah.
Yeah, there where they
But
have like a hand or a foot hanging off the bed, and something
they
touches
can't
it.
stand it or something. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know. I think I'm glad we talked about this. I mean, I think we covered a lot.
yeah. I think so too. That was good, and so we have a
What do you
couple
want to talk
other
about next
shows.
time?
I'm thinking either the whole how we react and why we react the way we do to paranormal experiences. I think that might be a good one. Maybe that will be the next time. I do think we should cover uh the bed kind of the bedroom kind of thing at some point. Maybe I don't know. It could be kind of weird, but also there's just so much about it. But yeah, I think the reaction that topic will be good for next time. So yeah, that sounds like a good plan for next weekend.
Nice. Sounds good.
Well, thank you for being here as always, Jen, and it's great to talk to you again, and look forward to doing that again next time.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, no problem. Always glad to have you here, and yeah, thank you all for being here and listening in and sharing all the links. And yeah, somehow the blanket will protect you. That's the thing too. People will hide in their blankets when things happen, and it seems to, in some cases, work. So that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all next time on Salsido Paranormal. Take care.